All right. Hello, everyone. This is Antoinette with Foundation for Living. Today, I'm joined here with Dr. Lawrence James, and he will be discussing the importance of having good mental health. Thank you. You can take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Antoinette, and Foundation for Living. I appreciate you having me on this afternoon. Um, as I think about the question that you're asking, just in general, around foundations for good mental health, um, it's it's not as complex, I think, as people often think it is. I think there's a lot of things that each one of us can do in the process of just daily living, and a lot of it has to do with self-care, really looking inside of yourself and really recognizing where you have your own personal strengths and where you find um, good, solid, positive interactions, whether that be with people or things. I mean, if you like reading or any of those kinds of things, finding that place where you can find peace, I think, is probably one of the most critical things that any of us can do to have good mental health. In the environment that we're in today, there's so much coming at folks in terms of the insurrection, politics, um, violence, especially against members of the Black community. Um, I think it's really important to know not only where your safe place is, but where you find comfort, solace, peace. I personally think about that on a daily basis. Where can I personally find peace, and I seek that out in everything that I do, whether that's the people that I'm around, the work that I do, where I go. I mean, I think that's probably the most critical thing that I could say to anybody. Know what gives you peace, and then, frankly, run to it, and get as much of it as you possibly can. Now, for those of you who are going to say, I find peace in sex, that ain't what we talking about. Okay, let's just be very clear. That can be a part of a good, healthy lifestyle, but doing anything in excess is not what we're talking about. We're really talking about some things like in your own spiritual self, your soul, that you find peace. And so I just wanted to start with seek peace. That may be the best thing that any of us can do in our lives, to start with a good, positive mental health space.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I definitely like you making that distinction that you want to find peace, you want to find solace, and it's about self care and mentioning that, yeah, maybe sex is not the thing that you need to be doing and finding, running to that. And
I should have added drugs too,
that's
right?
what I was going to say, drugs and
Smoking too much weed
alcohol.
ain't it.
Right.
Drinking too much ain't it. Because
Exactly.
and look, I'm sort of joking about it, but I'm not. Because the
Right.
reality is that many folks do think that they find peace in drugs and alcohol and sex and all that kind of stuff, and those give you short-term gratification. I'd be lying if I didn't say that didn't give any and all of us some kind of short-term gratification. But over the long term, one of those things often create more problems for us, and it is short-term. Those are not things that, over the long term, really create a healthy environment for any of us. And so we've got to find other ways to create that kind of peace. And peace to me is something that's much more long-lasting and long-term than something that's in the moment, right? Where you get that sort of immediate gratification. So,
Perfect. Thank you. So
mhm.
then I guess that would be your first question then. What are you most passionate about in psychology and mental healthness or mental health? So that's great. We'll go on to the next question. So the next question is, in your profession, are there trends you're seeing that need to be addressed?
Yeah, it's I think probably the one that's most predominant right now is all of the depression, anxiety, distress that's happened as a result of the pandemic. Um, folks uh, Folks have really, and it's been interesting because I think the arc to this has been somewhat long. When the pandemic first happened, I think a lot of people were super excited just not to have to go to work, or they could stay home, and they were finding a lot of positives in de-stressing from the daily grind. But over time, what we're seeing is that the isolation, even for folks like myself, who well-known and professed introvert, that the stress of kind of being distanced from people all the time is actually, we're seeing sort of the negative ramifications. So I think people, and then you add on to that, people are home with their families as much as they may love their families, all day, every day. You don't get a break. And so that's creating lots and lots of stress for people. And people normally, if you get sick and tired of your family, you can go to work for 7 or 8 hours, or vice
Right.
versa, right? People don't have that. Work and home are all the same place. And so people, I think, are really struggling to figure out where they can find outlets, in a world in which there's lots of prohibitions about going out and being connected with other people. And so, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we're seeing. I think in particular, beyond the pandemic and the distress that that's created, in general, I think in the Black community, as positive as we might say, um, the outcomes of the social justice movement has been, the clear, um, impacts of white supremacy culture are, I think, at no point in my life have been more profound and prominent, for the African American community. We are seeing it every day. The events of a week ago Wednesday, uh, being I think a prime example of, Black folks looking at that saying, that's not how I would have been treated, and trying to figure out, what do I do about that? How do you process that? How do you make sense of it? Even if you go, well, that's white supremacy culture at its finest.
Right.
The angst, the mental, physical, and emotional distress that comes as a result of really seeing a mirror that says, you're being treated like a class citizen. The rules aren't fair. I think is really hard for people to process. And so I think a lot of what mental health professionals like myself are looking at, has to do with, how do we help, folks in the Black community work on healing themselves and creating, frankly, not just individual healing, but healing within the community, so that we can prosper, as a community, and not default to negative behaviors, that may actually make our lives, worse, because of all the distress that we're experiencing.
Right. Yes, there is definitely a lot that compounds on top of it. Like you talked
Hmm.
about how the family's like a unit, and then there's the stress of just not having an outlet from the family. Then the
Yeah.
community is sometimes, if you're in a mixed community or whatever, then that can be an unrest because of what's going on. And then
Hmm.
you talk about like the politics. So it's just like
Yeah.
compounding, compounding, compounding on top of you. So I can see where you can see that spike in the depression and anxiety and stresses. And you would think
Yeah.
this would, like you said, give you time to breathe, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, and the real hard part about it, I think all of it is, there's just not really any easy answers. I mean, I think a lot of the resolutions are not as complex as we want to make them out to be, whether that
Right.
be politically or professionally in the mental health field. But there is complexity that's there, and oftentimes the solutions that are available to us just aren't. Um, they're not easy. As much as people want to get a quick fix and, give me a pill or something like that, it, it, it's it's more complex than that. It takes more than that to do that. And I think, when I think about what's going to in particular help folks within the African American community to heal and be better, it's not defaulting to simple or simplistic answers. It's recognizing the complexity, of what's in front of us, and then putting in the work. To be mentally and emotionally healthy takes work. It's just not going to happen, by you just sort of showing up and click, it's there. We've got to have the tools to enable us to have, a good positive outlook, good positive mental health. And I think, the conversation that we were having earlier, around, not defaulting to something like sex or drugs, is a part of that. But if you don't, if that's the only tool that you think you have available, right?
Right.
I can go smoke a blunt and I'm gonna be good for a couple of hours. If that's all you have, or think that's all that you have available to you, guess what? What are you going to default to? You're going to go smoke a whole lot of blunts,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So we've got to, and I put a lot of this on people in my profession. We've really got to help arm people with additional tools, additional skills, additional capabilities beyond just, the simple that's in front of people, and I think a lot of that starts with one, just helping people to understand how do I how do I even understand what my emotions are? I mean, what's the complexity there? I mean, it's so easy to be like, well, I'm just mad.
Mhm.
Well, okay, that's part of it. What
Right.
else? Because I mean, often anger, especially I think in disenfranchised communities, Black and Brown communities, anger is really a mask for what we were talking about before, things like depression.
Right.
And so, we show up as little Black boys and little Black girls at school, as an example, and, they're labeled as being just angry. And it's like,
Right.
yeah, that's not really the whole story. There's a lot
Right.
of depression. How do you help them to manage and cope with the depression? But that first starts with being able to identify, what am I feeling? You
Mhm.
know, I mean,
Right.
I can be mad, I can be sad, I can be depressed. All of those things can be a part of what's happening with me emotionally. And why that becomes really important is I may need different tools to
Mhm.
deal with each one of those things. So it's not just one size fits all. It's like, hey, you know, to help me to sort of manage that anger, I need to do X, Y, and Z. But to
Right.
manage the depression, I need to do A, B, and C. And
Mhm.
so we've really got to arm people with a complexity of tools,
Right.
um, to enable them to identify what the problem is that they're having mentally and emotionally, and then use the right set of tools to help them to deal with it. And that becomes really how we help people to grow. If you will, I'll digress for 1 second because this is my
No,
own
go
personal
ahead.
this is my personal soapbox in this
Yes.
in this work that I do. Um, and I'm gonna say this loud and clear: the mental health community has gotten this piece wrong, in what we do. We tell people to think their way through mental and emotional problems. That, in my opinion, and I will tell you honestly, most people who do what I do not necessarily agree with what I'm getting ready to say, but it's mostly because they don't know what they're talking about. And you can print that. We tell people to think their way through emotional problems.
Mhm.
That sounds logical. It sounds right. Um, but here's the problem: it's the wrong set of tools for soothing an emotional problem. You have to have emotional tools to solve emotional problems and understand what the right actions are, to solve those emotional tools. Now, we don't teach people how to do that. In my practice, I do teach people how to do that. But I would say most people who do this work do not do that. They use things like cognitive behavioral therapy, which most of your listeners may be familiar with if they've ever gone to see a therapist, and they tell them, let me help you to think better.
Mm.
Well, if you've
Right.
ever been in a situation, um, faulty thinking happens all the time.
Mhm.
I will. I My running joke always is I'm literally 5'6". But when I'm watching basketball on TV, I'm shaking and baking. I think I'm Dr. J, and I'm six. I'm 6'7" and I can dunk. The
Right.
reality is I'm 5'6" and I can't go to my right. That's what's real.
Right.
But when I'm watching the game, man, I can hoop like nobody's business. That's faulty thinking.
Right.
Okay. And so if I'm using my brain to help me to soothe an emotional problem, it's often going to give me cues, tell me to do things, take actions that really aren't designed to soothe myself emotionally. And so I've got to use an emotional mechanism to help me to soothe an emotional problem. There's an area of the brain called the amygdala,
Mhm.
and the amygdala is this, it literally means almond shaped. And it's this area, kind of below what's called neocortex, which is thinking brain.
Mhm.
It's in an area called the midbrain, and all things from your physical sensations go up through your spinal cord into midbrain first before they ever hit thinking brain.
The logic. Okay.
Right, the logical brain, exactly.
Mhm.
So neocortex is logical brain, thinking brain, right? And
Mhm.
why that's important is you feel stuff
Mhm.
before you ever actually are consciously aware of what you're thinking. So
Right.
the dude who somebody says something crazy to him hauls off and punches somebody in the face.
Mhm.
And they go, damn, if I had taken a second to think, I wouldn't have done that. Yep, that's exactly
Yep.
right. What happened? Your emotional brain kicked in first.
Exactly.
and
Yep.
you then got to brawling before you ever thought. And you're right. Maybe if I had 2 extra seconds to think, I'd have been like, that's stupid. I'm not going to do that. And so we've got to have, and we've got to teach people in our community in particular, and not because our community is worse at this than any other community. We're not. Human beings are human beings. Unfortunately, because we live in a racist society, I think the consequences for
Right.
folks in our community can be way worse if we don't self-manage our emotions better than we often do. And so that's why I say this. But the prescription is learning to understand, one, I'm going to feel things before I ever think about them, and then using neocortex in the way that's appropriate, which is to think, create
Mhm.
ideas. What are the ideas that might help soothe me emotionally? But to filter that on the back end through an emotion layer, which is to say, if I actually punch this dude, in my silly example,
Right.
if I punch this dude, will I actually feel better?
Mhm.
Right. And some
Right.
people be like, yeah, maybe a little bit, but they'll go, but the consequences of it aren't so great. Right.
Right.
But what else might help me to feel better? Maybe I say something smart alecky. Maybe I don't say anything at all. Um, maybe I'll walk away. There are lots of ways. And so these idea creation is what, kind of neocortex does really well.
Mhm.
So we want to use it for that. That's an appropriate utilization of it. But we want to filter those ideas through an emotion center that each of us has. When I'm trying to do that for myself personally, the mechanism that I use is my heart tends to race.
Mhm.
Like whether I'm experiencing any emotion, whether it's a love emotion, whether it's a anger emotion, my heart tends to race. And so when I'm filtering those ideas, I pay attention to what my heart does,
Mhm.
and I'm filtering it through that mechanism, going, okay, if I say go punch that guy, does that make my heart race more or less?
Right.
If it makes it race more, that's a bad idea.
Not it. Right.
That's not it. That's not it at all. You know,
Mhm.
if the idea is, I'm good at saying, kind of what I like to say, snarky comments to people,
Mhm.
sarcastic comments. Um, you know, if that feels better, I might go, okay, I'm not just gonna let them get over on me, but maybe I'll say something, kind of smart alecky, but not smart alecky enough to, like, get us to boxing. That might
Right.
feel right to me through that. It's like, okay, I can breathe. Or sometimes it's like, say nothing. I'm just gonna sit here. I'm gonna walk away and breathe. But whatever kind of brings that temperature down for me and heart racing. If I asked you, you could tell me when you're feeling things, how do you experience that in your body, right? Most
Right.
people, it's like heart racing, sweaty palms, upset stomach. I mean, those are all the physiological ways in which we know that we're experiencing things. And if you use that mechanism, you can really learn a lot about how to manage your own emotions, mediate your own emotions. So that's my sidebar soapbox. But I think
Love.
it's really important that people sort of understand, at least from my view, kind of how the process of emotions works, versus just people going and telling you, "Hey, man, think your way through that. Think better." It's like, you know, nah. I mean, you're, by the way, as a sidebar, you're seeing all the remorse of all the insurrectionists today who are
Yeah.
saying, "I got caught up in the emotion of the moment. I don't know that I buy that, but that's what they're saying. I got
No.
caught up in the emotion of the moment and I ran into the Capitol and I'm destroying stuff. But now, I think because jail time might be confronting them, frankly. But
Right.
let's be nice. If but afterward, now they're going, boy, if I had been really thinking, I wouldn't have done that.
Mhm.
There is some truth in that
Right.
for most of those people.
Mhm.
Um, but if you can't mediate your emotions, if they run amok, you're going to find yourself in situations that you didn't really want to be in, that you didn't plan to be in, versus, kind of understanding emotionally what's driving me and how do I leverage that emotion, that knowledge. Because look, emotions are knowledge. It's telling you something. And
Right.
it's not necessarily telling you something good or bad. It's just telling you something. It's an alert. And so how do you use that alert to help you to make the best, most healthy, most peace-giving and peace-providing decisions for yourself in your own lives. I think if more people understood that interrelationship and used it appropriately, I think we'd have a whole lot less violence in this country and probably throughout the world, frankly.
Right. Oh no, I like that because you've got to do the work on the inside. You've got to recognize your feelings. And when you
Yeah,
talk about the disconnect between the your peers who stress the cognitive thinking or using that method, like you said, if you're using the wrong tools and you're starting with the wrong foundation, then you're never going to get to the right resolution.
that's right.
And you've got to do it goes back to your other point as well, that in order to have a healthy assessment of your own emotions, you have to actually feel. So you can't
Mhm,
use drugs, you can't use whatever those crutches are that you
mhm.
use to hide those emotions and bury those feelings, because you've got to learn what's going on. You've got to
That's right.
be able to recognize it. So
That's right. That's right.
thank
That's
you.
right.
Thank you.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Okay, so we'll go on to the next question then. Um, is obtaining and maintaining healthy mental health expensive? And how does a family get access to care if they can't afford to do so or they believe they can't?
Sure. Um, uh, the reality is it can be.
Mhm.
It can be, and so I'd be lying to folks if I said it wasn't. On average, going to see a private practice therapist, $100 to $150 an hour is typical. Um, if you're paying out of pocket. But almost if you have insurance, private insurance, um, all you're really left to pay is your copay, unless you have a deductible. And most copays are typically around about, somewhere between $10 and $20 per session. I will say for any of our listeners who may have Medicaid, uh, if you have the Medicaid HMO products, um, that actually does pay for mental health services and would allow you to see a private practice mental health professional. So that's an avenue, and those costs are reduced. It just means the therapist has to be in your network, so you need to know and understand something about how your insurance works.
Right.
But that's available. I think for people who don't have any insurance at all, don't have Medicaid, um, there are community mental health centers throughout the Chicagoland region, throughout the state, that are available, that essentially provide pro bono services. Um, Another possible opportunity, and I don't know this in Chicago, I'll be honest about it, but it just entered my head as we're talking. Um, Lots of university counseling centers
Mhm.
and clinical centers. So in Chicago, DePaul, uh, UIC have training programs for aspiring therapists. And many of those programs not only provide service to students of the universities, but they often will provide services to members of the community. And
Right.
so that can be another avenue for folks. Now, the downside of that potentially is you may be working with somebody who's a student who's in training,
Right.
um, but typically there's no cost for it. So that's a possibility, but so you'd have to call any of the universities to understand if they have those programs and if they're available. But that's a possible avenue. But for most people, um, outpatient, community-based mental health centers and not-for-profit organizations provide free mental health services to their clients. Um, when they're out in the community. So
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we'll definitely make sure to look up some of those links and have those available. And the important part is understanding your insurance, because some people who
yes,
may be employed may actually have this coverage and they'll be able to go and take advantage of it.
yeah, and if you're employed and you have insurance, um, I believe 2017 there was a law that was passed, that was a mental health parity law that was supposed to mandate that all insurances had mental health services available. Whether or not that's actually happened is a whole nother question, but that was supposed to be a part of it. So, um, I would check with, if you're employed, check with your human resources organization. They should be able to tell you what they are. There are some different provisions in terms of the amounts of services
Mhm.
that you may be able to have over the course of a year, deductibles and things like that. But it's definitely there and available. And you remind me, um, for many folks, especially folks who work either for city or state government or federal government,
Mhm.
almost all of those organizations have what are called employee assistance programs, EAPs.
Mhm.
Um, those typically will give you 3 to 5 sessions with a private practice clinician at no cost to you. It's just a part of your benefits package. So that's another avenue for those who are working to be able to get in and see a therapist. And those don't typically have copays associated with them. So it's a nice avenue. And if you've got a family plan or whatever, if you've got kids, your kids or your spouse can utilize those services as well.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So the next question is, do you think the current trend of self-care is really promoting healthy mental health, or is it promoting selfishness? And in your experience, are people actually doing the work? And I guess to clarify that a little bit is
Mhm.
that you'll see a lot of people talk about personally, like, oh, I have this, or like they'll
Mm.
say they have anxiety or they have depression or they have different things, and they may not have actually spoken with someone to diagnose them,
Sure.
and then they end up going through, and I think it might sometimes put off people who actually do go to, see a mental care expert,
Mhm.
and then or mental health care expert, and then you just have somebody that's throwing around certain terms,
Yeah.
and it can be kind of insensitive.
Yeah. It's so I'll tell you. Um, Professionals like myself are what I like to call the absolute court of last resort. Nobody comes to see me first off.
Mm.
Um, Everybody, you can talk to your mama, your daddy, your cousin Pookie. You can talk to everybody, your minister before you ever come to me.
Okay.
In most instances, that's not absolutely true, but in most instances, most folks, by the time they walk in my office, they're like, Dr. James, I only came to you because I talked to everybody that I know and none of them could help me. And I'm, and honestly, people are like, I'm desperate. And if
Right.
this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
I wish people would utilize behavioral health services earlier than they do, but typically people don't. I mean, even as somebody who lives and works in this field, I'm more likely initially, if I'm struggling with something, to talk to one of my friends and
Mhm.
get, and talk it out with them, than to think, oh, right away, I'm going to go to a mental health professional. And in many respects, I actually think that that's right.
Mhm.
Because most of what people are dealing with is kind of day to day angst that doesn't necessarily rise to the level of a severe mental illness. So it, and a lot of it is what we'd call transient. It'll pass through.
Mhm.
But there's a set of the population who have issues, whether there's sort of significant behavioral health issues or domestic violence, relationship issues that do really warrant and require the assistance of a professional. And so, that people sort of utilize, family and friend network first, I think makes some sense. That people are looking to utilize self-help kinds of tools initially at some level makes sense to me. Um, I think what people have to be really careful about though is to be honest enough with themselves as to whether or not the things that they're doing are actually helping them.
Mhm.
Um, right? Because if you're doing some self-help program, meditation every day or whatever, and the the things that you're struggling with after a period of time really aren't getting better, and in fact may actually be getting worse, you continue to do some of those things, but you probably need more help and assistance to really move the needle for you to get to a better place and a better situation. And if you're experiencing a very significant bout of depression or anxiety, those self-help tools, frankly, aren't going to be significant enough to help you. You may need to see a therapist. You may need to get on a medication regimen if it's significant enough. I mean, for some people, it can be so severe that they actually need inpatient hospitalization. And so, again, I think it's worthwhile to try to manage what you may be experiencing. But I think at the end of the day, if your symptoms are severe enough, talk to a professional. And if you don't want to talk to me, you can, especially now with telehealth, talk to your physician. Many of those folks have experience, have some level of training, high level in, kind of assessing mental health problems, and can kind of give you some advisement on that. But back to your original question in terms of is it selfishness? Well, that's hard to say. I mean, you know, my knee jerk reaction is there's a little bit of selfishness in it. Look, I might frame it differently and say this:
Mhm.
all of us need help. Um, we all, none of us are out here by ourselves, um, and can figure everything out on our own. And so it's important to leverage all of the resources that are available to you, whether they're in your personal network or more expanded, to help you to live and be at your optimal healthiest. And so there's no shame. I know we talk a lot about stigma and shame within the African American community around mental health resources. Um, and I'm biased, but there's no shame in seeking out help to get healthy. You know, just like you'd seek out help, for diabetes. I mean that's a healthy decision. When I think about it, people who are saying, I'm really struggling mentally and emotionally, I need some help. That honestly is self-care.
Mhm.
That's taking care of yourself, because you're recognizing, I can't do this. I need some resources beyond what's available to me. And so that, anybody who walks in my office, I always commend them, because I'm like, look, you've made the first step, maybe in a long line of steps to take care of yourself. Because I know it's not easy to walk into my
Right.
office and admit to somebody, I ain't got all this figured out, and I need some help. So, I commend people who really take the the time to really go out and get professional help when they need it, when they realize that some of the things that they may have been trying to do just aren't working.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. So the next question, it kind of was already answered when we went off a little bit. That question was, if there was one thing you wished people knew about healthy mental health, what is it? Um, but we'll go ahead and skip that one since that was answered already. And then we can
I'll
go
go back
to,
through it again if it's helpful.
oh yeah,
Just
go
joking.
back there. No, I'm just
I'm just kidding. I'm just
playing.
kidding.
Yeah, no. But the last question then is, how often do you find yourself talking to people about stress, like managing stress and stress factors? Because it, is a silent killer.
Uh, Man, look, I talk to people about stress probably every day, whether it's in my personal life or in my professional life. Um, you know, People, and that was before the pandemic. I think the pandemic has made it worse. I think people are living really stress-filled lives, much more so than I can remember, 20 or 30 years ago, at least in my perception. Um, and I think in particular, it's having an abundance of impact in the African American community. Socioeconomic factors, folks struggling to keep and maintain jobs. Really, if you go back all the way back to 2008, 2009, 2010, with the economic downturn, Black folks lost jobs at a much higher rate than their white counterparts.
Right.
And it's interesting because the research has suggested that Black folks were only starting to catch up in 2019, 2020,
And
from that assault, 10, 11 years ago. And then you have pandemic. Um,
right.
and so you can imagine it'll be another 10 or 20 years. And so, so people are really stressed out. I think, if I had a magic wand, I would honestly say to folks in Black and Brown communities, um, strive for all the success that you can have in your life, but don't strive in a way that you're always trying to keep up with the Joneses. It's killing you. Um, my niece always tells me, she's like, Uncle, I have a Toyota Camry. She's like,
Hmm.
Uncle, you need to buy a nicer car, you know? And I'm like, why? And she's
Right.
like, you can afford a Mercedes or whatever. I'm like, you don't know what I can afford, first of all, but let's say I can.
Right.
I say, why should I buy a new car? I'm like, my Toyota Camry's paid for. I
Hmm.
don't have a bill, right?
Hmm.
Um, I make the decision not to buy a new car because
Hmm.
I'm like, having a new car is easily $30,000, $40,000,
Right.
easily. I'm
Right.
like, that means I got a bill, three, four, $500 a month to pay for that car, versus zero, right? That's a stress
Hmm.
that I don't need, that I don't want, you know, all for so that everybody can go, you know, people be like, damn, Dr. James, you should be rocking a Mercedes. I'm like, maybe, but no. I'm like, it doesn't, I'm like, because your perception of me, if your perception of me has to do with the car I drive, I don't care. It doesn't
Right.
matter to me. And so, you know, I would tell everybody, stop trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Hmm.
You gotta do the things that you need to do to take care of your family, put food on the table, have a roof over your head, all those kinds of things. Spending 800, $1,000 to buy your kid a PS4 or 5 or whatever the heck came out over Christmas. If
Right.
you actually can't afford that, don't buy it.
Right.
And again, I know it's hard to tell your kid, baby, we can't afford that, but guess what? They're gonna get over it.
They
They're
will.
not harmed for life because they don't have it.
Hmm.
In fact, you can think about partnering with them to go, hey, you know what, we can't get it right now, but maybe if that's really important, um, let's see if we can work toward getting it. That's
Right.
also an important lesson for them about immediate gratification or not, right? So
Exactly.
it's it serves lots of purposes, to be able to say, um, to someone, yeah, we can't do that, but we can do this. Here's what we can do. Here's what is important for us as a family, and and we can work toward that other thing, but maybe it's not the most important thing, because I think we spend way too much time, thinking about the latest Timberlands and whatever it is. I'm not that cool, so I don't know what's cool these days. But whatever the latest cool thing is, um, versus really thinking about what I think is really important, um, and life giving and life affirming, for each and every one of us. And so, there's a little bit of judgment on that, but my first prescription is, don't try to keep up with the Joneses. Um, do what you need to do to take care of your family, meet all the basic needs of your family, and because that's what matters. How other people are looking at you. You know, um, uh, at least from my perspective, that doesn't matter, frankly, at all. But to
Right.
me, but I know it matters to some folks. But I think we give too much weight to how we think other people, see us, and God knows that's a part of the stress that people are living under.
Mhm.
Trying to be like, I gotta have this because I want people to think I got a little something in my pocket or this or that, and it's like,
That's
nah.
okay.
I'm like, they don't know what's in your pocket,
Right.
or not.
Exactly.
And maybe if we all stop trying to keep up with whoever we think the Joneses are, maybe we're all living a happier, healthier life. Not all of us can be LeBron James.
Mhm.
Those are Those are extraordinary folks, not only because of their physical gifts for the sports that they play, but because of the money that they have. That's not most people. You know, most people are kind of living very middle class lives, and they driving Toyota Camrys like me. You know, with a roof over their head, going to work, and continuing to live. And so, um, and frankly, I don't know that any of those folks who have all that stuff
Mhm.
are any healthier or any happier in their lives because they got stuff. They got stuff,
Mhm.
but stuff doesn't necessarily make you happy. If I go back to finding peace, you know, if I filter my thought about buying a Mercedes, it actually gets my heart beating faster. It creates
Right.
more stress than peace. I'm like, oh Lord, I got a whole big, that's a knot that I gotta pay. I'm like, so maybe if I put it back through my own emotion filter, I'd say I don't get it because it actually increases my stress
Right.
and decreases my peace. And so, I want to continue to engage in, and I challenge all of your listeners,
Mhm.
engage in activities that bring you peace and comfort, in your life, especially emotionally, and things that don't do that, at least in my mind, you probably shouldn't be engaging in it. You should
Mhm.
let them go. You should let them go.
Thank you. Those are some good words. And I think definitely to add on to that, one of the things about keeping up with the Joneses is social media. So
Hmm.
a lot of people have incorporated that into their daily lives and perception, and it's had the idea where people feel like their life has to match social media.
That's right.
And a lot of the stuff on social media is either selling something because it's literally an ad, or
Mhm.
it's selling a lifestyle that this person, it was just for the moment. It was set
That's
up for
right.
this. And now
That's
people
right.
are trying to aspire to that level or to that
Yeah.
thing, and it's not real. So
It's not
uh,
real.
right, it goes back to the self part. So it goes
Mhm.
back to doing the work in yourself and understanding
Yeah.
yourself, and you can separate those things. Oh, that's for make believe and entertainment, and then this is what I
Mhm.
want. And they'll just always be those things that you want anyway.
Look, absolutely, and I don't spend a lot of time personally on social media, and I don't spend a lot of time bashing social media.
Right.
Um, but I think in many ways it should be, um, for the reasons that you just articulated. People have grown to believe that what they see is real, and
Mhm.
much of it is not. It's a lie that's being perpetuated to make you go buy stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and frankly, all of the American economy is built on you buying stuff. We
And
don't
more.
really manufacture or make anything anymore. Our economy is driven. That $600 stimulus check was such a boon to the economy because, for one simple reason, people took that money, especially folks who had less means. They took that money and they spent it, and that's
Mhm.
what actually buttressed the economy. Rich people took that money if they got it and put it in their savings and kept it. They didn't spend it, and so you know many folks who look like me and you are driving the economy by our expenditures and
Mhm.
not saving and taking care of ourselves. So one, it again, it's a false narrative.
Mhm.
There are things that each of us needs, but at the end of the day, let's think about, what do you actually need?
Right.
There's stuff that I do that is discretionary, that's fun,
Mhm.
but whatever I do that's fun, um, I can afford to do it,
Mhm.
and it's not going to impact my ability to take care of all the basic needs that I have in my life. And I would challenge anyone, have fun. I mean,
Mhm.
live. Every once in a while, do something stupid.
Right.
But don't do something stupid in such a way that it negatively impacts you and your family's ability to live um, the other 364 days out of the year.
Right.
Um, right? It should be discretionary. It should be, you can afford to do it easily, and be unimpacted by doing that. If there was a prescription for that, people would be a lot better off. And honestly, I mean, I laugh. I get these messages on Facebook.
Mhm.
Um, I don't actually care what you made for dinner.
Right.
I don't care.
Right.
right? It don't care. It doesn't matter. Um, glad you're alive.
Mhm.
You know, glad you seemingly are happy. But all this stuff that this TikTok showy stuff that people are all seem to be into. Um, I'm old. I'm old, so I don't
That's
really get
okay.
it.
I stopped. I was like, I'm not making any new profiles on anything
No,
else. Like
yeah, I'm
Instagram,
like,
Facebook, Twitter. That's it.
yeah. I mean, I try to understand it, and I'm like, I ask younger people who are part of my life. I'm like, so why are you doing this? I'm like, what's the value? I'm like, I'm like, I'm like, who really cares that you're doing that?
Mhm.
Um, I want to be an influencer, whatever. I'm like, but again, I'm being old and judgmental. I don't know what the value of that is. But
Right.
at the end of the day, um, that's also looking for validation for who you are outside of you, not inside of you. Because if you are whole inside yourself, you don't need any of that. You don't need any of that. So, if I ever post anything on Facebook, it's usually like happy birthday to my friends.
Right.
I couldn't tell you the last time I posted. I mean, I think 90% of the pictures of me on Facebook are pictures that were posted by friends of mine who tagged me in them. I'm like, I'm not sure I've ever actually uploaded a photo of myself. I'm like, you don't need to know where I've been. It's not
Mhm.
important to me to let you know that. And not because I'm trying to be secretive, but it's just, I don't need that validation. You
Right.
know, I'm validated every day by the work that I do, the
Mhm.
human being that I am, I hope, and how I treat people who are part of my life. That validates me. Um, that I got 15 likes on a post, that's nice.
Right. What
I
does that
mean,
mean?
and it's nice, but you know, tomorrow I will have forgotten about it, and you will have forgotten about it. It's not that important. So I think we've got to really kind of right size all of this stuff, and really sort of seek meaning in things that are truly meaningful, um, and put away those things that you know. And I'm gonna try not to be judgmental here, but put away things that really don't add to your peace.
Right.
Um, and then maybe that's a filter. If trying to be a TikTok influencer or Facebook influencer or whatever the influencing things are that's supposed to, if that creates stress in your life, you should probably listen to that, and you probably shouldn't be doing.
Right.
You know, you probably shouldn't be doing it. So I'll leave that where it is. Let's not create let's not create stress for ourselves. There's enough of it in the world, um, outside of it, that we shouldn't be adding to it, by the choices and decisions that we're making in our lives.
Mhm. Thank you. I agree. So that was actually all we had as far as the questions for you today. I do appreciate it. That there's quite a lot of gems over here that I have written down that I have for the workup, but I can't say it enough. Thank you. Thank you. We really
My,
do appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. I always love opportunities to speak about mental health, and especially to think about and speak about it as it relates to the African American community. And I'm gratified and honored by your words. Hopefully, there are a couple of gems that, um, uh, or at least thought points that people can take away, that they can utilize to help them to better navigate and have better mental health, and to find some peace in their own lives and on this life's journey that they're on. So, thank you for having me.
Thank you again, Dr. James, and you have a great one.
You do the same.
All
Bye-bye.
right. Bye bye.
Bye.